Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic. Let's do it. What's the most psycho case of playing victim you've ever seen? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. One time, my stepmom was yelling at me, and at that point, I was no longer living with her or my dad, so I kind of just laughed and turned around to walk away. As I turned around, my shoulder nudged her, and I kid you not, this woman screams, "He's hitting me! He hit me!" I was 16 at the time, but was an athlete that left home to play hockey at a boarding school, so I didn't look like a 16-year-old. Now, this is at a big family reunion, so everyone sees it, and everyone, even the kids, start laughing at her. She had a reputation as crazy beforehand, but it was amusing to see other people ridicule her. I blew a girl scam, so she claimed I sent her death threats that drove her to suicide, then faked her suicide. Got people messaging me at 2 a.m. telling me to kill myself. Once the police did a wellness check, everyone said things like, "Oh, everyone makes mistakes." Not one apology by anyone who took her side. I looked into suing her for libel. One lawyer said whether or not I sent her a death threat was a matter of opinion, and that it would be hard to prove damages. Damages are assumed when you falsely accuse someone of a felony. So I got a second opinion. He said retaliating for bringing attention to illegal activities was legally justified. So now I'm looking at small claims court. Probably my high school sweetheart ex, when she thought I was selfish for not wanting to get back with her after she cheated and left me for an older man with 2 kids a couple of months after we finished school, who justified it because I carpooled with a mutual female friend to a work meeting. After the fling, didn't work out. This 38-year-old hockey mom and I, female 40 at the time, were friends suddenly, during my divorce from my husband. We were united in domestic abuse stories. I was done divorcing, and she was starting the process, so pretty close friends, talking about intimate things normal people tend to hide. I heard all about her husband's abuse, and I honestly hated the guy. Suddenly, our other mutual friend was discovered sleeping with my ex-husband. Problem was, she started sleeping with him before I left the marriage and moved out. Long story short, the only reason I had a sudden friend was because she was in cahoots with the other adulteress, and she was gaining intel on my plans. Honestly, about the worst thing for an abused woman is for someone else to tell him of the secret planning involved in escape. She honestly put my life in danger. I ended that friendship immediately. Several years down the road, my new boyfriend befriended that woman's ex-husband at the gym where I worked. He lived about 10 houses down from my boyfriend. Inevitably, I came into contact with the ex a lot. We became friends. I heard his side of the story. Stories that matched up to nothing like she said. He had proof that all she was doing was manipulating me by playing victim so that I would open up to her, and it worked. Later, she was guilty of stalking him, stalking others, putting sugar in his gas tank, the whole 9 yards. She wasn't a victim. She was a perp. That is like movie villain bad. What a terrible, terrible person. A lot of them. Ugh. Disgusting. When I was a kid, I was at a friend's house and we were wrestling on the grass while our parents had a few drinks and watched. All of a sudden, he grabbed his face and started rolling around screaming, then accused me of stabbing him in the eye with a rock. Same guy, a different time, we were playing tag or something in his yard. I got bored and wanted to go home, so I snuck out through the garage and locked the door that led to the backyard, then went home. An hour later, my mom dragged me out the front of the because my friend's mom was pissed because she'd been working and he'd stood at the door banging on it and yelling until she went down and unlocked it. I refused to apologize because there were 2 other unlocked doors and 2 unlocked gates that he could have used, but chose to stand there banging and screaming so that I'd get in trouble. I offered to buy my ex-roommate Chinese food because she was broke and I had $30 left from my paycheck. She threw a tantrum and then didn't speak to me for 3 days because I insulted her. I literally said, "Hey, I want to treat us to Chinese. Do you want the shrimp?" Then told me I was so awful she considered kicking me out. All I asked was about Chinese food. Eventually, I found out she was ashamed to admit that I earned more money than her. $30, really? So my wife's mother has always been super controlling and abusive. When we met, my now wife was 19, and her mother hated me because I encouraged her to make decisions for herself and not let herself be controlled. One of those questions she ended up asking was about what she truly believed religiously. She was raised hardcore Christian, but after she moved away from her mother, she ultimately ended up not being religious at all. When her mother found out, she was furious. She called screaming and crying and said a direct quote, "You're oppressing me by not being Christian." I was close enough to hear the conversation at the time, and we both were dumbfounded for a whole 10 seconds, just trying to figure out what the hell she thought she was saying. I was in a crowded parking lot, driving around looking for a space. There was one car ahead of me. The car ahead of me stopped, so I stopped as well. I'm not sure why she stopped because there were no empty spaces and no one was pulling out, but whatever. Then, before I even had time to react, her reverse lights came on and she came flying backwards toward me. I didn't even have time to honk. She slammed into the front of my car, got out of her car, and started screaming that I hit her. When officers arrived, she was crying and shaking and complaining that her neck hurt and cursing me for slamming into the back of her car. Thankfully, 2 people had been walking through the parking lot when this occurred and told the officer what really happened. Later, the driver of the car that hit me tried to tell her insurance company that I knew the witnesses, and that's why they lied. I didn't know the witnesses, by the way. At any rate, if the witnesses hadn't stuck around to give statements, I'd have been screwed. My wife's cousin married a girl, and after a few months, she said he was abusive, he's not, and divorced him and took half the money that he had saved to go to med school. Turns out, she had done this to someone else before. She acts like this victim, gets a lot of money, and moves on to do it again, probably when she's out of money. Anyway, that cousin is now happily married to a wonderful person, and they have 2 kids. Much better situation. Well, based on those patterns, they're only going to get worse, so your cousin, though it sucks, ended up in a great spot and was probably much better off getting out when he did. My mom, she was in and out of my life growing up, loves playing the victim. It's the only thing she knows how to do in life. She literally sobbed to me about how horrible of a mother she was and how much it affects her to be reminded of her mistakes, but in a way that I was supposed to pat her on the back and say it's okay. More recently, she's told me she forgives herself for practically abandoning me as a kid, and so my feelings about it aren't her problem. Now she's mad at me because I won't allow her to even know my child, and a good portion of my family feel bad for her because she doesn't get to be a grandma, lol. You aren't a mother. Why would I give you the privilege of being a grandmother? She's definitely also got some narcissistic traits and maybe a bit of a sociopath. I lived in my college town for many years before moving here, about 15 hours away by car, because of the pandemic. I didn't formally move home at first because none of us knew how long the pandemic would last, so I kept my apartment, grabbed my cats, and drove home. My best friend, who I had been thick as thieves with for years, who I even stood with her at her wedding as her maid of honor, very fortunately, lived across the street. When I first left, she was kind enough to run over occasionally, run the water, grab the mail, etc. We had always done this for one another when we were out of town. After a couple of months at home, it became clear my job was permanently shut down, and school was going to be remote. I agonized over whether or not I was going to formally move home. I loved my apartment and my adopted town. Anyway, cost-wise, I realized I had to move home. I lost my job, I have expensive tuition, and I could live at home for free with my parents. I called my best friend, let's call her Sarah. We kept in contact while I was home, but like everyone, a few months into the pandemic, the quarantine blues hit and made it hard some days to even want to reach out to people. But we called probably every 2 weeks. I tried calling her to talk to her about the choice, a topic we hadn't discussed much. She didn't pick up. I tried texting, called again, and for a week I heard nothing. Eventually, I texted her telling her that I was going to move home and saying that I'd really like to talk to her. Sarah basically responded that there was no point in us talking because I'd clearly made up my mind, which I had no money to pay rent. She told me she couldn't believe I was abandoning her. Keep in mind, I was already a little heartbroken about the choice already. Anyway, Sarah told me that I was abandoning her, and I asked what the alternative was. I would be homeless if I went back because my job was gone. She told me if I was homeless, then she would be too, somehow insisting that it was selfish of me to not want to be homeless. Better that me, her, and her husband all be homeless together? I let it cool off, hoping she would come around, and she never did. I tried a bunch more times to reach out, and every time she told me I was a selfish bitch and didn't consider the way she felt about this decision. When I tried to give her her keys back, she sent her husband out. 10 years of friendship gone. OMG, I know of someone who pretends to have an epileptic fit anytime her mother or carer needs to take a break from caring for her. The mother, carer, is allowed to do non-break things such as grocery shopping and errands, but may not do anything the victim perceives as abandonment, such as visiting a friend or taking me time. The victim has severe BPD and real epilepsy, but uses fake fits to prevent the mother from leaving. The mother can't even be certain if it's real or a fake seizure, so she's forced to call the ambulance and wait to see, even if she's 99% sure it is a manipulation. The victim also has her fake fits if she is losing an argument, needing attention, or feeling low, etc. A lot of people self-diagnosed BPD in themselves and loved ones, but when you meet a true BPD, you are struck with such a sense of holy F, this is so obvious, that you stop calling simply neurotic, anxiously attached, volatile people BPD. I upset my friend when I brought it to her attention that we hadn't spent any time together in quite a while and I missed her. She had been spending all her free time with her new boyfriend for months, which I understood, but I really hoped we could hang out again soon. This sent her into a very unexpected rage. She yelled at me for being so terrible, said her grandpa had recently died, so she was dealing with a lot, and that I was an unforgivable asshole for bringing her favorite person, her grandpa, into it. I didn't. When I tried to understand where this was all coming from and what was going on, she told me that she had cut herself over and over because of this, and that it was my fault. Then she ghosted me and blocked me on everything. To this day, I still have no idea what the F even happened. Oh, and in the middle of it all, she also told me she was having to put down her childhood dog that day to make me feel even more terrible. Months later, I looked her up on Instagram and saw her dog was still very much alive and perfectly fine, so yeah. My sister abused, neglected both of her children. Her boy was 1 and her girl was 7. She lost them both and proceeded to fake cry and post all over social media about her kids getting taken away and cried to all our family members and shit. And then she had the balls to ask me. I thought she was a good mom. I told her no. She then proceeded to tell everybody that I said she was a terrible mother and blah blah blah, and I just can't. Wish I wasn't related to her. A close relation cheated on his wife whilst she was 8 months pregnant, flew to Canada to hook up with them. We were in the UK, under the guise that it was a business trip. He was a low-level employee, so no way this was true. His wife was freaking out, called our whole family trying to find out if we knew anything about what was going on. It's important to note that people cheat for a lot of reasons, but what really bugged me about this is when he came back, he acted like nothing had happened. And we hosted them for both Christmas, where they played Happy Families. I had enough at this point, and when a private moment popped up, I challenged him on it and told him what he had done and was utterly out of line. At first, he denied anything had ever happened, that it was a business trip, that, yes, he had visited a friend whilst he was there. that because I assumed he was having an affair with someone just because they were a woman, that I was a misogynist. And finally, that I should be grateful to this person because if not for them, he would have committed suicide. I remember feeling incredibly angry at all of this. Whilst his marriage is not my business, what really pissed me off was his obvious belief that everyone in the family was an idiot who believed his bullshit, and that we should just ignore his awful behavior toward his wife, and had never been anything more than dedicated and supportive. If he wants to be with someone else, fine, go ahead. That's his prerogative, but don't lie to me about not, and then try to make me be the bad guy and play the victim when I say cheating on your 8-month pregnant wife is a shitty thing to do. On a final point, I subsequently found out that he had also had this other woman fly out to the UK, where they stayed at his friend's house for a week, where they spent an entire time banging. I know this because the friend told me about it, as he was annoyed that he had basically used his house as a shag pad whilst his wife and child were in the house. So his protestations of men and women can just be friends or BS. I'm sure they can, but don't piss on me and tell me it's raining. My ex, once she got caught cheating, blamed it on how much I had to work to support us. It worked for about 4 seconds, honestly. Then I rolled with it because I was tired of 60-hour weeks. Same ex once stabbed me, then complained how hard it was to clean my blood out of the carpet and the fancy white couch we'd bought with the money I worked for. She threw a microwave at me. The spinny plate broke. She complained about it for a year, that the replacement spinny plate didn't fit right, occasionally spilling soup or wobbling a chicken nugget off. We'd bought the replacement at Goodwill after I'd cut back my hours at work and money was tight. Not to take away from the greater point, but I always wonder what goes through someone's mind when they're like, I have to throw something at someone, what's closest? And they get a microwave. I mean, that's some deep-seated anger. I think that's carrying stuff from her past. Sorry, man. My abuser cried victim after I woke up from 5 years of gaslighting and abuse. They claim that I was crazy and attacking them and lying. They cut me off from our shared social group by convincing everyone that I was hurting them. I lost everything to them. F them. In high school, I had a small crush on my friend's sister. I thought I could trust my friend not to tell her. He told her. Then she went around telling people I R'd her. Every time I would go to my friend's house and she was there, she would go to her dad and say, "Get this creep out of my house because he R'd me." Thankfully, my friend's dad was chill and calmly said, "Go to your room and don't talk about guests like that." About 3 years later in grade 11, I went to a Halloween party and she was there. She quickly started yelling at me, "Get the out of my face, you effing artist." Most of the people at the party didn't believe her, but all of her friends that were there believed her. I was like, chill out, no need to raise attention. We don't even have to see each other. We can literally just stay away from each other. She decided to take out an axe and bear spray she had in her backpack and pointed them at me. She said, "Get the out of this party or I will literally kill you." Thankfully, the host of the party stepped in and diffused the situation. Came up to me and said, "I think you should go." But I was kind of riled up at that moment, so I was like, "No, I don't really want to go because I'm like down to be at this party." And yeah, I may have been a little rude, but can you blame me? I just got threatened. Anyway, after that, I didn't really see her all that much. Stopped being friends with her brother for other reasons, and then 1 year later, I hear that she dropped out of school and is living on the street in downtown, and I like to go downtown, so I would sometimes see her. Usually we would either never address each other or make disgruntled faces at each other, but every once in a while, she's with some friends, and she points me out and says loudly, "Oh hey, it's the artist." And usually I just walk past, but sometimes I would yell back at her, "Have a good life," and then show her my middle finger. Later that year, I moved up island, and and I would barely ever see her. Sometimes I wonder what she's doing at this moment. TL, DR, friend's sister I had a crush on threatened me with an axe and bear mace. Later on, she was living on the streets.